Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Debrief. Coming to you from our studios here in New Delhi with me, Siddhantani. And on the show today, our guests are talking about important stories from the United States, the Philippines, and the United Kingdom. So let's get straight into it. First up, authorities in the US have charged 23 people with the very serious act of domestic terrorism in the city of Atlanta in Georgia. This follows the latest round of arrests in a protest movement that has been on for months against the construction of a massive police training center in a forest outside or near the city. Protest groups have pushed back on the arrests as well as the narrative building that characterizes these protesters as terrorists and not those demonstrating for their rights. 35 people were arrested late on Sunday local time while demonstrators held a festival near the site of the proposed complex, which they've been demanding be shut down since back in 2021. Anish has been covering the story for People's Dispatch and joins us now with all the details via video conference. Anish, we're keeping you busy on Daily Debrief today. Two stories that you'll be giving us your views and your reading also of reports and other sources that you have, what they're telling you on the ground. First up, we're talking, of course, about what is being called Cop City in Atlanta, Georgia, a massive project, police training center. Tell us first, by labeling these 23 people domestic terrorists, the authorities in the US are setting a kind of dangerous precedent for, just citizens protesting against an upcoming government project.
Yeah, so it is kind of unprecedented in many ways for domestic terrorism charges to be actually we have seen a couple of cases in the past where protesters, like environmental protesters, especially were targeted with domestic terrorism charges. But many of these cases, we didn't see the state following through with, what they planned initially. In this case, we're seeing like the fact that there was a clash, sort of a, if not exactly violent, but a very disruptive clash between the protesters who were occupying the site and the not only the security forces but also the construction company who was constructing the cop city, as they say. And it's in this case there was some property damage, and it's based on this property damage that they're filing domestic terrorism charges against them. The Republican administration in Georgia right now doesn't seem to think a lot of maybe say like white nationalist and the growing white nationalist movement in the state as domestic terrorism, but definitely thinks of this incident of some property damage as as an act of terrorism by a couple of environmentalists. Nevertheless, the wider project, obviously, the fact that they were attacked, they were charged, and incarcerated, is part of like a wider crackdown on any kind of police reform or police abolition movement, and any kind of attempt to bring the police to account, because at the heart of this protest is, as far as here, there is a part of it that is definitely you have conservationists trying to protect the what they call as the breathing space or the lungs of Atlanta. And on the other hand, at the heart of it is actually the fact that this will be the largest, or at least one of the largest, actually, the largest police training center in the country, which will have a smaller replica of the city of Atlanta itself, the city itself being a majority African American or Black dominated city, with a significant number of other racial minorities, and with a history of high rate of police murders and police violence against unarmed citizens. So just the fact that such a project was envisaged and being constructed in the neighborhood of a place that was one of the epicenters of the George Floyd movement shows that there is definitely this level of charging this slapping them with domestic terrorism is an attempt or is an attack on this movement as a whole.
Anish, we've seen, you and I sitting here in India have seen the government use similar sets of charges against people protesting sometimes similar projects and similar situations. Uh, I want to talk a bit, and if you can shed a bit of light on this, about the US and when it makes commentaries on how other nations conduct their business. When we see cases like this, uh, what footing does really the United States, particularly the US government, have to take the moral high road?
Well, that's a slightly loaded question because obviously this is something that we have been talking about for a long while of the show itself. The US definitely does not have that sort of moral high ground, as they say, or any kind of moral turpitude to actually, make statements or even judgments about other countries and their human rights records because obviously you know their human rights record is just impossibly abysmal for a rich developed country and a country that claims to be one of the oldest existing democracies in the world. Nevertheless, you see these kind of things happening all the time, and very often you just see, the political elite just passing the buck or passing the blame on this matter. You will definitely have the Democrats always saying that this is just the Republicans doing something like that. It's just the Republican administration doing something of this sort. But very often we've seen the Democrats continuing many of these prosecutions. Very little will be done unless there is a massive protest happening to actually, take off these charges or help the people who are being persecuted through the state machinery. Nevertheless, in such a case, what we're seeing definitely is just this wider attempt to crack down on a massive uprising that actually did happen in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic against police violence, against institutional racism, and the fact that such crackdown very often does not, attract any kind of resistance from even whatever party you are in, from the political elite, is the more concerning part in many ways.
Fair enough, Anisha. And this is, of course, going to have an impact on the protest itself. What do you see that as being?
We will have to wait and see because the protesters are in no way going to go away. Neither is the movement right now. Atlanta has seen this sort of awakening, much like many other black-dominated cities in the United States, and communities are asking for accountability, asking for cutting down the exorbitant police budgets, cutting down, reforming the police itself or abolishing it altogether. And these demands are not going to go away anytime soon, no matter what the crackdown is at this point.
All right, thanks very much. And we'll be back with you in a minute to talk about protests in the Philippines. So hang around for a minute, please. So as I was saying, a week-long strike by drivers of Philippine public utility vehicles, known as jeepneys, began on Monday. Schools and universities across major cities in the country suspended physical classes, while businesses and production units were forced to close or work from home. And the government deployed over 18,000 extra police and other security forces to keep matters in hand. Jeepneys are not just a cultural icon in the Philippines, but form a vital role in the public transport system, employing hundreds of thousands of drivers and ferrying millions of mostly working class people across the country. Over 100,000 reportedly participated in the opening day of action, demanding not just more time, but financial support from the government, which has ordered a switch to cleaner forms of public transport. Anish is still with us, I hope, and has all the details on what's going on in the Philippines. So Anish, like I was saying, I mean, this is a popular mode of transport and also one that employs, several hundred or 100,000 plus are just participating in the strike. Tell us first about what led to the strike taking off. And of course, then how it is to strike in the Philippines at this point with the current Marcos Jr. administration in place.
Yeah, so the protest began because, and in response to the new set of modernization plan, as they say, of public utility vehicles in the Philippines, which includes and mostly targets these jeepneys. This mode of transport that is quite popular, is at the heart of Philippines public transport at this point, and pretty much is the the blood circulation of the Philippine economy, if you look at it. So protesters are calling out the government for this exorbitantly expensive sort of modernization plan that is being imposed on them. First of all, they are supposed to move to a more electric, more advanced, modernized form of jeepneys. Jeepneys are essentially the smaller mini buses. So they want them to not use the existing diesel engine, or the more backward sort of engines that they have. Most of them are second-hand engines, and from that they want to upgrade directly to an electric vehicle. The current vehicles cost anywhere between 150,000 to 250,000 pesos. This cost now can go up to 2.8 million pesos, which is around 51,000 US dollars per unit. And that's a massive cost to undertake. Like, it's pretty much the same as buying a car, and most of these drivers cannot afford that. You have nearly 500,000, or more than 500,000 actually, drivers depending on these jeepneys for their livelihood. You have 40% of all the vehicle trips undertaken in the Philippines being by jeepneys. So this is how important and crucial this sort of mode of transportation is, despite the outdated technology that they depend on, which is primarily because of the complete neglect that successive administration have shown for these drivers and this mode of transportation and this entire class of workers to begin with. But this sudden modernization plan, which was earlier supposed to be done by June this year, they extended it to December. But what happens is that even with December, many of them will be forced into being in cooperatives or corporations, to form corporations that will actually cost them even more money, something like 300,000 pesos as a startup capital, and individually they will have to cough up about 75,000 pesos each, and that can raise the cost to anywhere between 500 to 600,000 pesos for each corporation, and many of them cannot sustain, economically speaking, if they do not function as individual units, because they will definitely not be working in economically viable conditions if they corporatize themselves. So this is definitely an attempt to phase them out, and this is a targeting of the most working class mode of transportation. There is absolutely nothing being done on for private vehicles or any other kind of polluting vehicles which contribute to most of the pollution in the Philippines. And since pollution is at the heart of the argument by the government, there is absolutely no amount of money being done to modernize the transportation industry itself. And so these are factors that the workers are trying to bring out with their strike and protest.
Thanks very much, Anish. And finally, nurses, physiotherapists, and ambulance workers called off strike action in England in a significant breakthrough after months of actions by almost all workers in the healthcare sector to demand better pay and better working conditions, as well as higher staffing levels and the overall upgradation of the National Health Service. The strikes were called off after the government finally called on unions to start negotiations. But as our next guest, Anna Vrachar of the People's Health Movement will tell us, the battle is far from over. Anna, welcome back to Daily Debrief. Good to have you with us. Tell us, what is the latest with the negotiations? Who is participating, and what is the likely outcome? Is it likely to satisfy the demands that workers are making in the healthcare sector?
Well, it's been a breakthrough compared to what we have seen in February, when the UK government essentially refused to do any kind of significant negotiations with trade unions in the health sector. On the other hand, we've seen that at the beginning, when they showed this, when they actually called the trade unions to the negotiating table, they had a very picky approach. So they didn't invite all of them, but they invited only the Royal College of Nurses. So with time, the group extended, which meant that also physiotherapists and ambulance workers were represented at the table. And that kind of led the trade unions to postpone the strike actions that they were planning to do this week. On the other hand, we still know that the junior doctors are planning to go on strike next week. So that would be from a 48 hours walkout, which is still expected to cause several problems in how the NHS will function on those days. Now that's one problem. The other problem is essentially with what's on the table. And when the government approached the trade unions to negotiate, they offered a one-off payment, which would mean that the government would cover the extra costs that were caused by the cost of living crisis and by the rise of prices in the UK, in England this year. But it would only apply to this year. It's not actually the salary increase that the trade unions have been fighting for over the past months and years, essentially. So that is why some of the unions who could have been part of the negotiations chose to sit it out. Essentially, that's Unite the Union, who said that that kind of approach was unacceptable and that probably they would still have to wait to see how the government actually takes their demands seriously.
Right. Just give us a bit of context, Anna, for those of us who are not apprised fully of the situation that's ongoing in the United Kingdom. In terms of the overall context in which all this industrial action is taking place, the junior doctors strike that you were mentioning earlier, for example, if I'm not wrong, the first time ever the junior doctors are taking this kind of action.
Yes, so it's been a big wave of industrial action in the health sector in the UK. So when we talk about the strikes, they've mainly taken place in England, but we know that the overall crisis in the NHS is much more widespread. So what has been happening is that after years of budget cuts, of austerity measures being implemented in the NHS, by also through implementing privatization in more or less overt ways, the NHS is essentially on the brink of collapse. People are reporting waiting for hours in emergency services. They cannot access the care they need. And all over the country, there's a widespread shortage of health workers. So, moving a bit away from England, if we look at Scotland, for example, in September 2022, they were reporting more than 6,000 nurses and midwives shortages in the NHS there. And then the physicians associations came out with data that showed that there were over 1,000 physicians short. And this is in the context of the local government planning to employ around 850 doctors, which would still make it not enough to actually meet the demands. What this means for patients, of course, is very worrying, because then if we look at a specific sector, if we look at dental care, there were over 11 million people who were not able to access dental care they needed last year because of the changes that were implemented in the NHS. So it's something that's having a very, very concrete outcome for people. And on the other hand, people have been mobilizing together with health workers to protect the NHS. So this is, one other event that we can look out for, which is set to happen this Saturday, 11th of March, when both patients and health workers, left groups, left parties will march together for the protection of the NHS and essentially fight for better funding and better employment policies.
Right. Thanks very much for that, Anna. And this is a super important story also because of the narrative that is created, especially among those who try to access care. when they are made to wait and then therefore develop a certain kind of feeling towards public health systems, even though they are kind of denuded and degraded from within the system because of the kind of austerity measures and neoliberal policies that you're talking about. So thanks very much for giving us a picture of what's going on in the United Kingdom. Right, and with that, we wrap up this episode of the Daily Debrief from Anna, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch. Thank you very much for watching, as always. We ask you to head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for more details on all these stories and all the other work we do. Don't also forget to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back now after a day's break on Thursday. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.